And in this week's Retvlog, I'd like to go over some of the new Azerite traits that have been data mined. I've been checking on Wowhead, as well as some of the ones we already knew about. It looks like there's a few others as well that I'd like to comment on. First things first, in terms of where Retribution Paladin is at the moment, it hasn't really shifted as a class for a few weeks now. There are still a few things to be tidied up. We haven't got our class buff yet, so we still don't know what that is. We know what we'd like it to be, or what would be really good, which is a raid-wide DPS aura type thing. That would be quite handy. We've still got the Retribution passive. That hasn't shifted at all. We might be stuck with that. Hammer of Wrath is still not baseline. My concern with that at the moment is that we might not use it whenever we can, and that'd be a bit grim, given that not only is it a talent, but you can only use it, you know, in execute range or during Avenging Wrath. That means because you can only use it at certain times of the fight, it needs to be top priority when you can use it, and it's in serious danger of not. And even if it is, it's very, very slightly. But I just got the feeling that it's not going to be our top priority. Ability, you know, Holy Power Generator, whatever you want to call it. Unless, of course, they do what they have been thinking about in making it baseline, execute only, and therefore beefing up the damage. And then what the talent can do is then allow it to be used, say, during Avenging Wrath, in which case it's all good. The downside to that seems to be that there's an overall class philosophy attitude of increased downtime. There's a certain quota to make, and making Hammer of Wrath baseline and doing that causes issues with that. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these traits then. Now, the first one, we've sort of seen this already. This was the first Azerite trait that was ever shown as soon as they put even one piece of Azerite armor in. Avenger's Might, while Avenging Wrath is active, your mastery is increased by, it's 46 here, but it's increased by a certain amount. At the moment, you know, is that a great thing? Just like in Legion at the moment, mastery isn't necessarily looking like our best stat, even though in terms of the way it works, it's a lot more appealing, certainly it's a lot more popular. But in terms of its actual raw value, it's not looking great. I am assuming, though, that that will come out during tuning. I don't think there's an intention to keep it low in terms of value. So I think what will happen is when it goes through tuning, and bear in mind that might not even happen when it goes live. You know, there's several weeks in when we've started raiding before, you know, serious tuning is done. But hopefully it will be a desirable stat. Zealotry, this is affecting Crusader Strike, so it means your Crusader Strike deals an extra 6% damage over 4 seconds, so it's going to do a dot, as well as dealing some straight up additional damage at the start as well. So basically beefing up your Crusader Strike. That also doesn't really affect too much. You could argue that's going to, you know, looking at these traits and thinking, does that shift the value of any talent? You could argue that might shift the value of Fires of Justice a little bit, because of course that can allow you to cast more Crusader Strikes. But again, it all depends on how much haste you've got. Would you still want to at that point? The extra damage there doesn't necessarily mean that you'd want to use Crusader Strike as anything other than a filler when you have the need for that. And whether you've got the need for that, again, does depend on your haste. I know a lot of people have been a bit alarmed because on the one hand, we know that Blizzard have said that they want increased downtime, and that particularly affects a spec like Retribution Paladin. And at the same time, people trying it out or even just watching me on the beta going, oh yeah, it is slow, the old rotation's a bit slow. Got to bear in mind, those people and me, we're leveling, so we've got quite low haste values. Every time we ding, you know, we're losing some haste percentage, even though we're not obviously losing haste rating. So haste values are always below 20%, which is not ideal anyway. Next one, now this is a bit one... a strange one, really. Critical Flash. Now, you'd sort of think this is probably a Holy Paladin one. However, it wouldn't be completely unsuitable for Retribution Paladin in theory, because it says here, Critical Flash. Flash of Light grants you 77 crit strike. It's some crit rating, really doesn't matter what for 6 seconds, if it heals a target below 50% health. Now, okay, you know, it's got a cast time. Do you necessarily want to be using it as a mini DPS cooldown? Maybe, maybe not. But then it puts me in mind of Selfless Healer. So if people want to take Selfless Healer, or just, you know, there's no great use from the other talents, it is allowing you to use Flash of Light as an instant cast. So if you use it either on yourself, or I wouldn't go scanning for other people, but if you have, you know, use it on yourself, or have a macro to use on someone that you know is going to be quite lowish on health at certain times, which isn't necessarily the tank, then potentially you could get some crit rate out of this. I'm not sure I'd necessarily want to consider this to be something to really game, but, you know, every now and then, if there are no other suitable traits, obviously if there's a proper ret trait, then you would clearly use that. And so I don't think we would really use this, but it has one of those applications where you could use it as Retribution Paladin, potentially, but I really doubt that it will be a good one to go for. But it has some interest. When Blizzard were talking about the fact, oh yeah, you know, there's these abilities for different specs, but in actual fact some of the spells are cross-class, and, you know, it's only a suggestion. You could well use a trait for a different spec. Well, there's an example. Deferred Sentence, another Crusader Strike one. Crusader Strike has a 3% chance, not very high, to condemn your target dealing so much holy damage after 7 seconds. I don't know what the holy damage is. It's not even got a value on this one. It's just an X there. And after 7 seconds, it's very, very delayed. So not that much use for anything other than a boss, really, is it? It wouldn't necessarily even be that much use on trash. Maybe particularly nasty trash in a raid or a Mythic Plus, something like that. But I think this is, you know, and only a 3% chance as well seems a bit grim. So this one seems pretty weak to me, you know, and it almost doesn't matter how much holy damage it does. It's delaying it for 7 seconds, which means, you know, straight away you massively narrow down the number of situations in which it can even be theoretically useful. And then a 3% chance? That's not much, is it? You might not even get once per raid fight with something like that. Next one, there's a couple of Blade of Justice ones. Expurgation. Your Blade of Justice critical hits cause the target to burn for an additional so much holy damage every 2 seconds over 6 seconds. So a bit of a dot if you crit. So very much depending on your crit there. Bit of extra damage on your Blade of Justice, can't be bad. The next one is Blade of Justice critical hit. So again, it's only interested in our Blade of Justice crits. So if you don't have much crit, well, also burns the target for 96 holy damage over 6 seconds. So again, a weaker dot, this one, which seems a little bit odd. But again, data mined values, you don't know if it's like comparing like for like. Might be different item levels or something like that. Seems a little bit strange. They seem to do very similar things. They're, you know, one is very definitely doing a certain amount of damage every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. The other one just says over 6 seconds. So in a situation like that, usually it's a tick every second. You know, so the Searing Blades, looking at those values, is a little bit less. But it's doing the same thing. When you crit with Blade of Justice, you get a dot for 6 seconds on your target. Holy damage in each case, can't tell you whether that would be affected by Mastery. I would hope so. I really hope there's nothing that we can do holy damage-wise that wouldn't be buffed by Mastery. But, you know, I don't know that. I think with these things, it has to be added on individually. So they'd have to individually add that trait onto the Mastery table, as I understand it. Now, the next one is one that looks really good, and I'm sure it will be really powerful in terms of how it sims. But I'm not that keen on it, and it's Furious Wrath. Now, this says, when your Avenging Wrath ends, which will of course apply to Crusade, you gain up to 616 strength or intellect, I mean, you know, value, depending on item level, I guess there, for 15 seconds, based on how much damage and healing you did while Avenging Wrath was active. So in other words, you've got your Avenging Wrath, you fire it off, your wings is going, and you do a load of damage. Now, if you really maximised your time during wings, which of course you'd want to regardless, then you're going to be able to get up to that amount of strength to use for the next 15 seconds. So it's like another DPS buff there for you. Whereas if you didn't, or if you got stunned during your wings, or you had to move out for some mechanic, then you would get a much smaller amount of strength, so smaller buff for those 15 seconds. The thing I don't really like is it's effectively extending a DPS window by 15 seconds. It's much the same problem I had with or one of the problems I had with the extension to the duration of wings in Legion with the Wrath of the Ashbringer traits, because there's a lot of times when you can't really just stand still and funnel a boss for that length of time. Even worse, I imagine, in PvP scenario. So you're going to waste a certain amount anyway. So if that wastage ends up coming during the main wings itself, which of course you generally try and use it when you think there's very little chance of having to move out. But if you did, okay, you weaken in the trait as well. Or it may just be that you've had your 20-25 seconds of wings on the boss, but now it's really time to move out. Well, you're sort of then wasting the buff. On a lot of bosses, you probably can use your wings at a time when you wouldn't have to move out. I mean, you're talking about 35 to 40 seconds. A lot of fights, yeah, you can have that amount of time to constantly DPS the boss. It's just that on some fights where you can't, it might be a bit tricky. But so far, it just looks like, you know, a very good trait. One that would, I don't know how these will sim, but it just looks like one that would probably sim to be really good, and it'd be a really desirable trait. And then the last one, Healthy Judgment. Judgment's damage is increased by up to 34 based on the difference between your health percentage and the target's. Now, I don't know exactly which way round that is. I'm assuming it means that the greater the percentage, I'm assuming it wants your health to be high and the target's health to be low. In other words, Judgment will do more damage the lower the target's health gets, as long as your health is remaining quite high. So it's sort of like a rolling, creeping mini execute. And it is a mini execute. Even with the stat squish, 34 extra damage on your Judgment isn't very much. You know, it's not very much. Judgment is doing, you know, over 2k damage baseline, where I am at the moment. I've not, you know, on a lowish level Paladin, not even level capped. And yeah, it's 34. I'm assuming, again, because data mine some of these values are not quite right, because that would be extremely weedy. That wouldn't be worth bothering with as well. But if we take it in terms of, in general terms, this thing that does up to a certain amount of damage, hopefully it'll be a significant amount of damage, and it just does more, you know, if the target's on 10% health and you're on 100% health, then that would be quite a lot of damage that it'd be able to do there. I'm assuming. So something that gets better as the fight goes on. So those are the traits that we've got data mined so far. It's still not that many. And with the ones I haven't seen before, because some of these I'd seen before on pieces that I'd acquired either from leveling or in dungeons. I'm still not sure exactly which ones would come from dungeon. See, some of these ones like Furious Wrath I really don't think would come from leveling. I think that would be a dungeon one at least. It could even be a raid one. But there's a lot of things in the alpha that, although it's now looking much more, as Blizzard would call it, feature complete for release in beta, there's a lot of things that actually are really window dressing and they're not really in properly. The Azerite armor, I would still say, is not really properly implemented. So there's not just a lot of traits missing in terms of even what we can data mine, let alone get hold of, but, you know, access to some of these. I mean, I got an Azerite, or what should be an Azerite piece, from one of the new dungeons to be released yesterday, and it didn't have Azerite traits on it. It didn't have secondary stats. It was one of these with just primary stats. One of the ones that a couple of builds ago was changed, so they did have Azerite traits, but because it's from one of the very new dungeons to open up, they haven't put Azerite traits on it yet. So, you know, even in normal dungeons, they haven't really put them in. So, although Blizzard may have a fair idea of what's going to go in, we don't yet. So there we are anyway. Let me know in the comments below what you're thinking about some of these. Maybe you've actually got hold of some of these traits. Like the Healthy Judgment, I'd be particularly interested if anyone has actually got that and is able to explain exactly how it works. I imagine it is that you want your health high and the target's health low. Otherwise, it'd be a bit of a nightmare to use that. It'd be a bit of a Holy Wrath type situation, wouldn't it? But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share for further content. If you've got any specific questions about how Ret's looking, then of course put those in the comments below. Or join me for one of my BFA streams. I tend to do those. At the moment, it changes a little bit. Saturday afternoons, Friday afternoons, or Friday evenings, I should say, at my time. but I'm online various other times to take questions anyway. So thanks for watching. Till next time, I'll see you later.